Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, we're going to be checking out a brand new Pokemon in the world of Pokemon Go, KELDEO. KELDEO is a water and fighting type Pokemon with the moveset of Poison Jab, Sacred Sword, and Hydro Pump. Now, KELDEO isn't the best in the Ultra League, but it looks to have some very nice play in the Master League. So, as is tradition on this channel, I spent way too many rare candy, powered it all the way up to level 40, and tested it out in some level 40 Masters battles with members of my Discord. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches and check out KELDEO in action in the Master League. Hopping to the first match, we get a pretty decent lead KELDEO into Zacian. Despite the fact that KELDEO does have the type disadvantage in this matchup is honestly not a bad one thanks to KELDEO having Poison Jab. These Poison Jabs do quite a bit of damage. Zacian goes for the Wild Charge and they save switch into Zarude. Zarude is not going to appreciate these loaded Sacred Swords from KELDEO. First one connects and does significant damage. I'm going to farm up and fire off the second Sacred Sword just before they're able to reach a move. Sacred Sword gets the shield, and now I can send in Dialga to tank a move and farm down. This is big because this will give Dialga the energy it needs to outpace the Zacian if my opponent decides to bring it back in. I am able to get the full farm down, so I have energy on Dialga, and I have a little bit stored on KELDEO as well. My opponent is going to wait the timer and then bring back in their Zacian. I will fire off the Iron Head before they're able to reach a move. This should be grabbing the final shield. My opponent will be able to massively overfarm in this matchup, and they do, farming up to the back-to-back moves. I'm going to let the close combat go and then send back in KELDEO and use my final shield on the Wild Charge. This way, KELDEO will have a small energy lead for whatever my opponent does have in the back. Wild Charge gets the shield in the back. They have Ho-Oh. I'm not quite going to be able to make it to the Hydro Pump, so I bank all the energy I can, and I'm going to send in Lugia. Lugia will be able to absorb the damage from Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh goes for the Sacred Fire, and that does quite a bit of damage. I continue to farm, trying to make it to an Aero Blast, but I'm not able to get there. That's a little unfortunate. Sacred Fire actually takes out my Ho-Oh. I send in KELDEO, and now it's KELDEO's time to win this game. Hydro Pump takes out the Ho-Oh. Back in comes Zacian. Zacian gets farmed down, and that is a good game. Tough lead in the next match, KELDEO into Mewtwo. I immediately save switch into Lugia, and my opponent responds with a Waterfall Gyarados. Honestly, this is a pretty decent matchup for Lugia, just due to how absurdly tanky Lugia is. I build all the way up to the Aeroblast, and I'm baiting with a Sky Attack. My opponent calls the bait. I go for a second Sky Attack, but I lose CMP. This is honestly fine. A Crunch is not going to KO here, so I will be able to tank it, and then force Switch advantage or Shield advantage with this Sky Attack. Sky Attack does get the shield, so my opponent wants to keep Switch, and honestly, that's fine by me. I'm just going to let this go, and instead choose to get farm on KELDEO. That's not quite enough to kill me, so I stop attacking so I can get a little bit of extra farm on KELDEO. Back in comes Mewtwo, immediate switch into Dialga. I don't know Mewtwo's second charge move, and that is a bit scary. They farmed up a lot of energy here. I decide to shield, and it's just a Psy Strike. That's a little unfortunate. I will return fire with the Iron Head, and this should be grabbing a shield from my opponent. Iron Head does get the shield. At this point, with shields down, I'm going to make a brave call. I'm going to trust in KELDEO to win this game. They fire off the Shadow Ball. That gets me low. I continue to farm, and they reach one final move. I'm going to let this through, putting my full faith in KELDEO with a shield. In the back, they have a Sylveon, and it's a battle of super effective damage. Charm versus Poison Jab. KELDEO gets to the Hydro Pump. This is going to be taking out the Sylveon. Bring back in that Mewtwo. Mewtwo gets farmed down as well, as KELDEO slams the door. Bit of an interesting lead in the next match, KELDEO into Gyarados. While KELDEO does wall Gyarados' typical moveset, Gyarados also walls KELDEO's typical moveset. So I'm just going to stay in here, wait for them to throw some energy, and then I'm going to bank all of my energy and save switch into Lugia. In comes Lugia. My opponent is going to stay in here. Gyarados can, of course, hit for super effective damage with Crunch, so that's exactly what they're going to do. They fire off the Crunch, and then my opponent is going to send in Metagross. Metagross continues to farm. I'm going to fire off the Aeroblast. This will hit for some heavy resisted damage onto the Metagross. My opponent commits a shield. Honestly, getting shield advantage here is quite nice. I continue to farm, and they're going to fire off a charge move. I'm just going to let this go. I'm very close to a Hydro Pump on KELDEO. In comes KELDEO, and I'm able to win CMP. That is massive. This Hydro Pump takes out the Metagross. What do they have in the back here? and it's a Lugia, and I'm gonna send in my Dialga. Lugia definitely a lot scarier in level 40 Masters than level 50 Masters. I'm gonna farm up and then bait with an Iron Head, hoping to try and grab a shield. Iron Head does get the shield. That is big. My opponent has a lot of energy here. I decide to call a bait. I no shield, it's the Sky Attack, and that is a massive call. They're going to fire off another Sky Attack. I will, of course, commit the shield. The thing I have to watch for is our timers are desynced, and my opponent is going to take advantage of that. They send in the Gyarados to force me to fire off some energy. That is not the best. Iron Head is going to KO. I'm going to farm up here, bank the Iron Head, and switch into Keldeo. All I have to do is just get some extra Poison Jab damage to make sure that this is in Iron Head range, and this game is over. And this is definitely in Iron Head range. My opponent is going to fire off a charge move. Sky Attack will get rid of Keldeo, but I have the Iron Head loaded on Dialga. Dialga taking care of business and securing the win. Moving into the next match, picking up a bit of a tricky lead, Keldeo into Landorus. At the very least, I do resist Stone Edge, so they are going to be forced to go for Superpower, but Landorus is pretty attack weighted, so the Superpower is definitely going to hurt. They are at back-to-back here. I'm going to let the first through. Superpower does a ton of damage. I farm up, switch, and catch a Superpower onto my Lugia. Let's go. That's going to do absolutely no damage. My opponent is going to stay in here. They want to bank a Superpower for later, and they send in a Shadow Wall Rain. Definitely not every day you see a Wall Rain in the Master League. I'm going straight for the Aeroblast. Aeroblast does get respected with a shield. That is a bit unfortunate. My opponent does have a lot of energy here, so I'm just going to let this through. They fire off the Icicle Spear. That does get me low, and they'll be able to reach Icicle Spear number 2. This will come very close to knocking me out. I let it go. That plus one more Powder Snow is enough to KO. I bring back in Keldeo. I'm going to farm up and then fire off the Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword, not the strongest move, but Keldeo has very nice attack, so it hits very hard from Keldeo. In the back, they have Shadow Mamoswine, and this thing is about to get absolutely smacked with a Sacred Sword. Dialga gets the farm down. Back in comes Landorus. Landorus is not going to be able to reach enough superpowers to win this game. They're actually running Earthquake as their second move. That's very cool, as Dialga gets the win. Bit of a tough lead in the next match, Keldeo into Garchomp. I'm going to stay in this matchup, farm up 7 jabs, switch, and then catch a move onto Lugia. Really hoping they went for the Earth Power. It is just a Sand Tomb. My opponent is then going to respond with Melmetal. Considering I have Dialga in the back, I am very happy to be able to bait out Melmetal. However, this matchup is now even better for Melmetal because my defense is at -1. 2 Rock Slides is going to do enough to put me into farm down range. This second Rock Slide is going to get me extremely low, so I just decide to fire off the Aeroblast as soon as I get it, just to guarantee the damage. Aeroblast is able to land, and my opponent is going to get the farm down. I have loaded energy, so I'm going to fire off a move with Keldeo and win CMP over the Melmetal. This Sacred Sword will easily knock out, and then my opponent is going to send back in the Garchomp. Garchomp is at enough for a nuke. I'm going to respect it with a shield. And my opponent is running a double ground Garchomp, so shielding that Earth Power is honestly pretty huge. I'm going to start firing off Sacred Swords. Let's start grabbing some shields. I'm able to grab a shield, and I'm firing off another Sacred Sword. They know this is not a Hydro Pump, so they can let this through, but it will still do some solid chip damage. This is, again, enough for an Earth Power. Decision time. I commit the shield. I get baited, and in the back, they have Dialga. I may have a win con, but it's a very slim one. I'm going to fire off the Sacred Sword to grab the final shield, and then send in my own Dialga. After they Draco Meteor, I'm going to have to bring in Keldeo and farm up enough energy to be able to take out the Dialga and take out the Garchomp. This is going to be tough. I send back in Keldeo, looking to overfarm as much as I possibly can, and I overfarm. I'm hoping that this is enough here, but unfortunately, I think I might fall a little short. As you're going to see, Garchomp does make the Sand Tomb. Keldeo almost able to pull off the impossible. And that is a good game. Hopping into the next match, leading Keldeo into Kyogre. This is an incredibly good lead for Keldeo. My opponent is staying in this matchup, which is even better news for me. I do reach double Sacred Sword before they're able to reach a Thunder, so I'll be able to apply a lot of pressure onto this Kyogre. First Sacred Sword lands, and I reach Sacred Sword number 2. Decision time for my opponent. Do they want to get off the Thunder? And they do, so they're going to commit the shield. This is enough for a Thunder, so I will respect it with a shield. My opponent is going to bait with a Surf. That's a bit unfortunate, and they're just going to fire off a second Surf. This is not going to KO, it is going to be resisted, so KELDEO will be able to tank that no problem, and KELDEO is able to get the farm down. My opponent is going to be sending in their next Pokemon, and they send in Garchomp. I'm going to fire off the Hydro Pump. This will do some solid neutral damage if it lands, which it does, nearly taking the Garchomp into the red. I send in Lugia. Garchomp going to bank a move. They have Melmetal in the back, and this is not great for me. I'm going to send in Dialga because I need to force this Melmetal to debuff themselves. After they debuff themselves with a superpower, then Melmetal is going to be a lot more beatable for Lugia. I'm going to fire off the Iron Head as soon as I get it. This will do some solid chip damage onto the Melmetal, and Melmetal is now approaching Sky Attack range. I'm going to let this go. My opponent does not want to debuff themselves any further, so they're just going to fire off Rock Slides. This is now definitely Sky Attack range, so I should honestly be in a pretty nice spot here. I send in Lugia, going straight for the Sky Attack. This will be forcing the final shield. My opponent is probably going to look to switch out to reset the debuff, and that's exactly what they do. They send in Garchomp. Garchomp has the Outrage loaded. I'm able to tank that and get the farm down. Back in comes Melmetal. Melmetal continues to farm, but Lugia able to reach the Sky Attack. Sky Attack takes care of the Melmetal, and that is a good game. Hopping into the next match, picking up a pretty nice lead, KELDEO into Mamoswine. My opponent is staying in this matchup, and I'm more than happy to do the same. I'm going to farm up and then fire off the Sacred Sword. This is going to do a massive amount of damage if it lands, which it does. Mamoswine is going to return the favor. High horsepower would hurt, so I will commit the shield. We'll have to see, does my opponent save switch? Yes, they do. They're going to send in Lugia. I bank a bit of energy, and I'm going to send in Dialga. Hopefully the Mamoswine's low enough that I should be able to Dragon Tail it down with my Lugia at the end of the game. They're going to fire off an Aeroblast. They're up a shield. No reason to bait. That does a ton of damage. I will fire off an Iron Head. I'm going to bait here to try and grab a shield, because ideally I would love if an Iron Head was shielded, and if I was able to fire off one Iron Head as well. This will do some solid chip damage and put their Lugia into a range where I can farm it down with mine. I send in my Lugia, and they're going to fire off the Aeroblast. I decide to aggressively switch into KELDEO to get some energy, but my opponent simultaneously switches, and they bring in Togekiss. This is really not great. I fire off the Sacred Sword bait, I get a shield, but as you see, I'm going to fall short of reaching the Hydro Pump, so I'm forced to settle for the double resisted Sacred Sword. That's not going to do a lot of damage, and I'm going to send in Lugia, and here I make another mistake. I go for the Sky Attack. Sky Attack is not going to be doing enough damage here, and with Dragon Tail being double resisted, I'm not going to be able to farm down. What I needed to do was build up to an Aeroblast, because an Aeroblast would actually KO, and as you're going to see, this mistake is going to prove to be costly. I fire off the Sky Attack. It's going to be taking them out. My opponent sends in Lugia to get some chip damage. All that's left is the Mamoswine. Mamoswine lives on 1 HP and takes me out. Hopping into the final match, leading KELDEO into Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is able to reach a Brave Bird before I make it to Hydro Pump, so I'm just going to farm up and then switch into Lugia. They are going to fire energy, which honestly works very nicely for me, as basically the goal of the Lugia save switch is to be a damage sponge. Lugia is very tanky, whereas KELDEO is a lot more attack weighted. So KELDEO can output a tremendous amount of damage, but it can't really take a hit itself. I fire off my Aeroblast. My opponent is going to let that through, and they're going to continue to farm. I'm going to let this go. At this point, I don't really see a point in shielding my Lugia. Unfortunately, I fall just short of reaching the Sky Attack. I'm going to send in my Dialga to tank this energy, because Dialga will be able to absorb whatever my opponent throws. My opponent is actually running Hydro Pump on their Lugia, and I'm able to get the farm down. A spicy moveset choice. In the back, they have Garchomp. Garchomp continues to farm. Opponent is going to send in Ho-Oh, and here I accidentally go over 100 energy as I fire off the Iron Head bait. Iron Head gets the shield. I'm going to send in KELDEO, and KELDEO will be met with loaded energy from Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is going to fire off an Earthquake. I'm going to farm up, and you know what? I am not baiting. I'm going straight for the Hydro Pump here. Can we land the Hydro Pump? And we do. Down goes Ho-Oh. That's big. Back in comes Garchomp. Garchomp farming up, but KELDEO is very spammy, firing off the Sacred Sword and able to grab the shield. This is enough for a nuke. Decision time. Do I call a bait? I commit the shield. It's the Outrage, and that should be game over. KELDEO able to reach the Sacred Sword. Sacred Sword will be taking care of the Garchomp, and that is a good game. All in all, I leave feeling extremely impressed with KELDEO in the Master League. The combination of Poison Jab and Sacred Sword is incredibly deadly. The quick energy generation of Poison Jab, plus the coverage that allows you to beat Zacian as a fighting type, is quite nice, and Sacred Sword just hits extremely hard. There are definitely some meta Pokemon that it struggles against, for example Lugia, and especially Giratina Origin, but as long as you're running Pokemon that core well with that and can cover those weaknesses, KELDEO honestly feels like a very powerful anti-meta pick. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you're enjoying the content, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And a special thank you as always to our members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is absolutely incredible. So thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.